They called him a killer twice, once for the blood on his hands before the collar, once for the boy he refused to abandon. Father Elias Cain had buried his revolver 7 years ago under the floor of a church he did not deserve. He thought the ground would keep his sins quiet. He was wrong. Sins do not stay buried, they wait. And in the town of Widow's Bend, they were about to rise again, wrapped around a silent orphan boy nobody wanted to touch. The whole town would soon choose a side. Truth or rumor, a child or a curse. Before the sun set on that dusty frontier again, everyone in Widow's Bend would learn what kind of man their priest really was. Widow's Bend sat where 2 dry rivers used to meet. Dust ruled the streets, thick and endless, red under the sun. Wooden buildings leaned into each other like old men sharing secrets. The church bell rang cracked and late every Sunday, as if reluctant to call anyone at all. The town survived on fear, disguised as faith. Every stranger was judged before they spoke. Every tragedy was blamed on someone convenient. The townsfolk prayed on Sunday and gossiped on Monday, and nobody noticed the difference. Down at the saloon, the piano never quite stayed in tune. Ranchers argued over cattle prices. Old cowboys nursed whiskey and older grudges. The bartender kept a shotgun under the counter, and the sheriff kept his office door open, though he rarely used it for anything but naps. Justice in Widow's Bend was a slow, tired thing. It arrived late, if it arrived at all. 3 weeks before, fire had taken the Hargrove homestead at the edge of town. A husband, a wife, and a barn full of cattle turned to ash before sunrise. Neighbors woke to the smell of smoke rolling across the prairie. By the time wagons reached the property, only embers remained where a family used to be. Only one soul walked out of that fire alive. A boy, 7 years old, silent as stone. He had wandered into town barefoot, his nightshirt scorched at the hem, his eyes fixed on something no one else could see. Women covered their mouths. Men reached for their hats out of habit, unsure whether to remove them out of respect or keep them on out of fear. The town did not call him a survivor. They called him a curse. Rumor moved faster than truth in a small town like Widow's Bend. By the second day, 3 different stories explained the fire, and none of them matched. By the third day, nobody bothered checking which one was real. The general store sold gossip faster than flour that week. Women lowered their voices when the boy passed, then raised them again once he was gone. Men gathered outside the livery, trading theories like playing cards, each one wilder than the last. Faith and fear lived side by side in Widow's Bend, sharing the same pews, the same wells, the same dusty road. Most folks called themselves God-fearing. Few of them stopped to ask what that fear was actually protecting. Hope was a word painted on the church sign, but trust was harder to find on the frontier than water in August. Stagecoaches still passed through twice a month, carrying strangers who never stayed long enough to learn the town's secrets. Those who did stay learned quickly that Widow's Bend forgave almost nothing and forgot even less. Father Elias Cain arrived in Widow's Bend 5 years earlier, a stranger with calloused hands and a Bible he barely knew how to hold. Before the collar, men had called him Preacher Cain for a different reason. He carried a revolver faster than any hired gun in the territory. Outlaws paid him to settle debts nobody else could collect. Ranchers paid him to protect land nobody else could hold. He had killed for money, then killed for reasons he stopped remembering. The day he put the gun down, 3 men were already dead by his hand that week alone. He did not remember most of their faces anymore. He remembered all of their eyes. He did not become a priest because he found God easily. He became a priest because he could not live with himself any other way. The collar was not forgiveness. It was a cage he built around the man he used to be, hoping the bars would hold. Some nights they did. Some nights the old instinct stirred anyway, quiet and patient, waiting for a reason to wake. Every Sunday he stood at the pulpit and spoke of mercy. Every night he knelt alone and asked whether mercy could ever reach a man like him. He kept his sermons short. He kept his eyes low. He never once claimed to be a good man, only a tired one trying to become something better. The town trusted his sermons. They never asked about his scars. Cain preferred it that way. A quiet church asked no questions, and a man with his past needed a place that asked no questions. He swept the floors himself. He fixed the pews himself. He buried his revolver beneath the floorboards near the altar, wrapped in oilcloth, and told himself the ground would keep the secret forever. That peace ended the night the Hargrove barn burned. He rode out with the other men that night, boots in the mud, watching flames climb higher than the church steeple. He searched the wreckage until his hands blistered. He found no bodies worth burying, only ash and silence, and one small set of footprints leading away from the fire. Something in him recognized those footprints before his mind caught up. A child running from something no child should ever witness. The boy's name was Eli. Before the fire, he had laughed loud enough to annoy the schoolteacher. He chased chickens through his mother's garden and named every horse on the ranch, whether it belonged to him or not. His father called him a force of nature. His mother called him her whole heart. After the fire, he did not speak at all, not one word. Not to the sheriff, not to the doctor, not to the aunt who refused to take him in, citing bad blood and worse luck in the same breath. The town whispered their own story to fill his silence. They said he set the fire himself. They said his eyes turned strange after that night, dark and distant, the eyes of something that had made a deal in the flames. Children threw stones at his shadow. Shopkeepers locked their doors when he passed. Even the Reverend's own deacon called him the devil's leftover. Old women crossed the street rather than walk near him. Young men joked about running him out of town before he burned it down, too. Nobody offered him a blanket that first cold night. Nobody offered him a name kinder than the ones the rumors gave him. Eli said nothing to defend himself. He simply carried a small burnt locket around his neck, clutched so tightly his knuckles turned white, and waited for someone, anyone, to ask him what really happened. He slept behind the feed store the first 2 nights, curled against sacks of grain, listening to voices argue about what to do with him, as though he could not hear them at all. He learned quickly that silence was safer than words. Words invited more rumors. Silence only invited stares. Nobody asked. Except one man. Cain found him 3 nights after the fire, sitting alone in the blackened remains of the barn. Rain had turned the ash to mud. Eli sat in it without moving, staring at a spot where the flames had been fiercest. Cain crouched beside him slowly, the way he once approached wounded animals before he learned to kill instead of heal. "You'll catch your death out here," Cain said. Eli did not look up. His fingers tightened around the locket. Cain did not touch him. He simply sat down in the mud beside the boy, ruining his only clean coat, and waited. Thunder rolled somewhere far off, low and unhurried. Minutes passed. An owl called somewhere in the dark. A coyote answered from farther out on the prairie. Cain studied the boy's face by moonlight. He saw no curse there. He saw only grief, wearing a child's small body like a coat too heavy to carry. Finally, Cain spoke again, quieter this time. "I know what it's like when everyone decides who you are before you say a word." Something shifted in the boy's shoulders. Not trust. Not yet. But something. Cain thought of his own arrival in Widow's Bend, years before, a stranger nobody welcomed either. He remembered how loneliness could calcify into something harder if nobody interrupted it in time. He stood, offered his hand, and did not withdraw it even when the boy hesitated for a long, aching moment. Rain kept falling. The mud kept rising around their boots. Cain's arm ached from holding it out so long, but he held it out anyway. When small fingers finally closed around his, Cain felt something he had not felt since the day he buried his gun. He felt useful. He walked the boy back to the rectory in silence, one hand resting light on a small, shaking shoulder. He did not ask questions that night. He only gave the boy dry clothes, a bowl of stew, and a corner of the church floor softened with quilts. Eli did not sleep that night either, but he stayed. The church became Eli's shelter, though the town whispered that a priest sheltering a cursed child was a sin of its own. Cain ignored them. He taught the boy to feed the chickens behind the rectory. Eli's hands, once frozen in fear, learned to scatter grain with something close to purpose. Small progress, a private victory nobody else witnessed. Cain taught him other small things too, how to whittle a stick into something useful, how to saddle the old church mule without getting kicked, how to sit quietly in a pew without fear pressing down on his chest. None of it required words. Eli learned by watching, the same way Cain had once learned to survive by watching gunslingers twice his age. One morning, Eli placed a wooden cross he had carved himself on Cain's desk. Crooked, uneven, carved with a knife too big for his hands. Cain kept it exactly where the boy left it, and every visitor who noticed it asked about it, and Cain simply said, "A friend made that for me." Weeks later, during a thunderstorm, Eli grabbed Cain's sleeve when lightning cracked the sky. It was the first time the boy had reached for anyone since the fire. Cain did not move his arm away. He let the boy hold on until the storm passed and his small hands finally loosened. Slowly, the boy began sleeping through the night. Slowly, his shoulders unclenched when footsteps approached. Slowly, he started leaving the safety of the rectory to sit on the church steps in daylight, watching the town pass by without hiding his face. Then came the day at the well, when the blacksmith's son mocked Eli for being cursed and shoved him hard into the dirt. A crowd of children laughed. Nobody stepped forward to help. Cain arrived before the boy could throw another word. He said nothing threatening. He simply stood between them, silent as a wall, until the bully's courage ran out and he walked away. The other children scattered like startled birds. Cain knelt, brushed the dust from Eli's shirt, and said nothing at all because some victories needed no speech. That night, for the first time since the fire, Eli spoke. One word. Thanks. Cain did not sleep that night. He sat awake, smiling at the ceiling like a man who had won something bigger than any gunfight. He thought of every man he had once faced down with a revolver, and how none of those victories had ever felt like this one small whispered word. By the following week, Eli was answering questions with short nods and quiet murmurs. He still would not speak of the fire itself, but he spoke of chickens and mules and the shape of clouds before rain. Cain treasured every syllable like a man rebuilding a fortune coin by coin. Word of the priest sheltering the cursed boy reached Deacon Whitfield, a man who valued the town's comfort over its conscience. Whitfield had built his standing in Widow's Bend on appearances. He dressed finer than any rancher. He spoke louder than any sheriff. He collected favors the way other men collected cattle, and he did not intend to let a silent orphan and a stubborn priest threaten what he had built. Whitfield called a meeting inside the church, uninvited, and stood at Cain's own pulpit as though he owned it. Half the town crowded into the pews, murmuring, arms crossed, ready to be convinced of whatever story sounded most comfortable. "The town won't tolerate a devil's child living under God's roof," Whitfield said. "Give him to the county home, Father, or give up your collar." Cain's jaw tightened. "He's a child, not a curse." "He's the reason 3 good souls are ash," Whitfield snapped. "Everyone knows what he did." "Nobody knows anything," Cain said. "Nobody asked him." Murmurs rippled through the pews. Some faces softened. Most did not. "The evidence speaks for itself," Whitfield continued. "A boy walks out of a fire that killed his own family, and he won't say one word about it. That's not innocence, Father. That's guilt, hiding behind silence." "Fear hides behind silence too," Cain said. "So does grief." The room fell silent. Then someone in the back spoke words Cain had feared for 5 years. "Maybe the boy's not the only devil hiding under that collar. We've heard stories about you too, Preacher Cain. Men from your old life don't forget a face like yours." The truth cracked open like a door left ajar. A traveling rancher, passing through weeks earlier, had recognized Cain from his gunslinger days and could not keep the secret. He had shared it over whiskey at the saloon, and by morning the whole town suspected their priest of hiding blood beneath his robes, just as they suspected the boy of hiding fire beneath his silence. Whitfield seized on it instantly. "A killer sheltering a killer, isn't that convenient?" Cain did not deny it. He could not. "I was a different man once," he said. "I won't pretend otherwise. But that man is buried, same as the gun I carried." "Buried things have a way of digging themselves back up," Whitfield said, and the crowd murmured its agreement, hungry for a villain simpler than the truth. Two secrets, one town ready to burn them both. The sheriff stood near the door, arms crossed, saying nothing, weighing rumor against evidence the way he weighed most things in Widow's Bend, slowly and without much appetite for conflict. "Give us proof, then," Cain said, turning back to Whitfield. "Show the town real evidence, not fear dressed up as certainty." Whitfield's eyes flickered just for a moment toward the door. "The evidence is a dead family and a silent boy. What more does a town need?" "Truth," Cain said, "not comfort." A rancher near the back stood slowly. "Preacher's got a point. We've been quick to judge a 7-year-old and slow to ask a single hard question." Whitfield's confidence cracked at the edges, though he covered it fast, straightening his coat, raising his voice louder to fill the doubt spreading through the pews. "This town doesn't need a killer's sympathy for another killer." Cain held his ground. "Then find me guilty of what I was. But leave the boy out of it. He's innocent, whether this town chooses to believe it or not." The meeting ended without resolution, but something had shifted. A few townsfolk lingered afterward, glancing at Eli with something softer than suspicion. Doubt had entered the room, small and quiet, the same way courage always seemed to enter Widow's Bend. That night, Cain dug up his revolver. He held it under lamplight, the metal cold and familiar in his palm, memories of every man he had killed rushing back like smoke. Part of him wanted to load it, to walk into town and force silence onto every mouth that threatened the boy. His hands remembered the weight better than his heart wanted to admit. Old instincts rose fast, faster than 5 years of sermons had managed to bury them. Eli watched him from the doorway. "Are you going to hurt them?" the boy whispered, his second sentence since the fire. Cain looked at the gun, then at the boy who had just spoken his first real fear aloud. The question landed harder than any accusation Whitfield had thrown at him that evening. He remembered why he buried the weapon in the first place. Violence had never protected anyone he loved. It had only ever taken people from him. His mother, his brother, every friend who ever stood beside him with a gun in his hand. He thought of Eli's parents, taken by fire instead of bullets, and how rage had never once brought a single soul back from either. Cain wrapped the revolver in cloth and buried it again, deeper this time, beneath the same church floor. He pressed the boards back into place with his boot, slow and deliberate, like a man closing a coffin for the second time. "No," he told Eli. "We're going to prove the truth instead. That's the only weapon worth carrying." Eli studied him for a long moment, then nodded, small and solemn, as though sealing a promise between them. The next morning, Cain rode to the county records office and returned with an old survey map of the Hargrove land. Dust rose behind his horse the whole ride back, the same red dust that had covered Widow's Bend since before anyone could remember. Buried beneath a debt notice, he found what he needed. Deacon Whitfield had purchased rights to the Hargrove pasture only 2 days before the fire, a transaction hidden behind a cousin's name. Motive, land, money, not a cursed child. Cain rode straight to the sheriff's office first, laying the documents across the desk without a word of preamble. The sheriff read them twice, his expression shifting from tired to sharp in the space of a breath. "This changes things," the sheriff said. "It should have changed things weeks ago," Cain answered. "Nobody looked. Everybody assumed." Cain called the town to the church that evening, the same pulpit Whitfield had used against him. Lanterns lit the aisles. The whole congregation gathered, drawn by curiosity and the promise of a truth finally ready to surface. He laid the documents on the altar and turned to Eli. "Show them," he said gently. "It's safe now." With trembling hands, Eli opened the burnt locket he had guarded since the fire. Inside was a photograph, half-scorched, and a folded note in his father's handwriting, a warning that Whitfield had threatened the family days before the blaze, demanding they sell or lose everything. Gasps moved through the crowd like wind through dry grass. Whitfield lunged for the note. Cain stepped in front of the boy, arms open, unarmed, no gun anywhere on him. "Take it from me if you dare," Cain said, "but you'll have to go through a priest with nothing left to lose and everything left to protect." Whitfield's hands shook. The crowd's eyes shifted from the boy to the deacon. For the first time, fear pointed where it belonged. "He's lying," Whitfield said, but his voice cracked on the second word, and the whole church heard it crack. The sheriff, silent until now, stepped forward and took the note from Cain's hand instead. He read it aloud, slow and clear, so no one in Widow's Bend could claim later they had not heard the truth with their own ears. Whitfield was arrested within the hour, his confession spilling out faster than his lies ever had. He blamed greed, he blamed debt, he never once managed to blame the boy again. The town that once threw stones at Eli now brought him bread, apologies wrapped clumsily inside every loaf. Forgiveness came slower than accusation always does, but it came, one small kindness at a time, one neighbor at a time. Eli spoke fully again by the following spring, his laughter returning first in small bursts, then in the wide, uncontrolled sound of a child finally safe. He ran through the churchyard chasing chickens again, just as he once ran through his mother's garden, and Cain watched him from the rectory steps like a man witnessing a small resurrection. Cain never dug up his revolver again. He kept the boy's crooked wooden cross on his desk until the day he died, and he told the story often, though never with his own name attached to the man he used to be. He simply said, "Once, a town judged a boy and a priest by their worst days. It took a fire to show them who we really were." Eli grew up in that church, under that steeple, inside a town that slowly learned the difference between rumor and evidence, between fear and faith. He became known years later, not as the cursed boy of Widow's Bend, but as the young man who rebuilt the Hargrove land his parents once lost, plot by plot, with his own 2 hands. Every Sunday after that, the church bell in Widow's Bend rang a little less cracked, a little more sure of itself, as though it too had finally been forgiven. And on quiet evenings, when the frontier wind rolled dust down Main Street the way it always had, folks in Widow's Bend still pointed to the little church at the edge of town and told newcomers the same story. A priest with a blood-stained past and a boy the whole world once feared had taught an entire town what truth, courage, and second chances could look like if anyone was brave enough to choose them. The saloon piano still played out of tune most nights, and the sheriff still napped more than he patrolled, but something in Widow's Bend had changed for good. Neighbors checked on neighbors a little faster now. Strangers got the benefit of doubt before the weight of rumor. Even Whitfield's old pasture, once bought through threats and fire, was returned to the Hargrove name, and later to Eli himself, deed and all, evidence enough that justice, however late, still found its way home. Cain lived long enough to see the boy become a husband, then a father, then an old rancher telling his own children about a priest who once chose truth over a loaded gun. Love had rebuilt what fear once tried to burn down, and in Widow's Bend, that was the only happy ending anyone still talked about. The end.